Hey guys, it's Brent with Lykins Motorsports. Those are the GT40P heads off of Project Triple J before I had them. So you can see they pretty much look brand spanking new when they come out of that machine. And you can see the bronze valve guides there, as well as the pedestal work, drilling and tapping. So I wasn't about to spend Alright, so if you go to this website, if you Google search for Stan Weiss, Weiss, you'll come to this page. And Mr. Stan has put together a compilation of pretty much every cylinder head that you can think of. Chevrolet, Ford, Pontiac, Honda, Yamaha, pretty much anything that you can think of. I use this a lot to when I'm doing research for engines, to pick which cylinder head I need to pick with and what some people have got out of the head, so you can look at the stock head flow and also ported versions as well. But if we look at the Ford stuff, you can see it starts out with a Y block, and Mr. Joe has some data in there. I don't know if he knows that or not, but he has contributed to this page, as have I on some of the FE stuff. But you can scroll down through there and see there's more Ford stuff. 4-cylinder V6, Cleveland, modular, Windsor. So we can scroll down through there and see the GT40P heads. And you can read pretty much everything associated with that head as it was recorded there. 145cc intake port volume, 55cc exhaust port volume, and that's with a 1.850 and 1.46 valve pair. Combustion chamber volume measured at 60, and then you have the lifts all the way up to 700 that were recorded. So we end up hitting about 195 CFM at 600 and 700 lift, and of course there's a little variations with flow benches, so that's what was recorded with that particular flow bench. So that's a good baseline for us to look at, and you can jot those numbers down if you wish. I'm going to jot those numbers down too, so that we can make a comparison against our GT40P heads as they showed up to Joe with no port work, just a little bit bigger valves and a valve job. Alright, so side by side here, the top group of numbers is from Stan Weiss's page. Those are the ones that I just showed you. Below is the way that the heads were delivered to Joe with the valve job and upgraded valves. So we went up to a 1900 and 157 valve. The intake port volume was measured at 142.6 cc's. Now, one thing that I will say, just before you start looking at numbers and wondering why the low lift numbers went down, it's because we did a 50-degree valve job on these heads to help pick up the upper end flow. Didn't really know if it would work or not. We'll find out when the engine is on the dyno. But so far, the numbers that Joe have given me are pretty good in my book, so we'll go with that. But typically, when you do a steeper valve job and that angle gets more steep, the low lift numbers kind of suffer, and then it starts to pick up through the mid-range and the upper end. So that's reflected here. If you look at the two flow numbers at 100 lift, now again, another caveat, we don't know whose flow bench this was done on. Joe actually does all of his stuff at his own shop. He's got his own flow bench, so the only real numbers that I'm going to be worried about is the differences between what he measured with no port work and then what he measured afterwards. Otherwise, we're measuring or comparing apples to watermelons. Same thing with engine dynos. If you have a bunch of dyno numbers, unless those numbers have came from the same dyno, they really don't mean anything. So, okay, getting back to the valve angles. So at 100 thousandths lift with stock valves, no port work, 58 and 45. So if you jump down to the heads with the upgraded valves and valve job, so the 100 thousandths lift number, the intake port flow went down a little bit. So did the 200, but you'll notice those exhaust numbers went up due to that extra area from that the bigger valves. Having trouble speaking English today. So we'll continue on through the numbers. Starting at about 300 lift, you'll see the intake flow pick up. At 400, it's pretty pronounced. So 186 and 194. 500 lift, we're still up about 10 CFM. 600 lift, we're up 3 or 4 CFM there. But if you look at those exhaust numbers, so quite a bit of difference. Look at the 600 lift on the stock valves, no port work, 128, and 600 thousandths lift on the head as equipped with the 1570 exhaust and the valve job 162. That's a big bump. So already right out of the gate, just with a good valve job and some updated valves, you know, a little bit of performance gains there. So let's show you some pictures of that Joe sent with the heads on his bench, and you'll see how good they look. The picture I showed you before really didn't do anything justice. You'll get to see a lot more here in a second. Alright, so we'll start out with that one. That is, looks like a finished head there after he's done the port work, and goes to show you how good that oven and that steel shot makes that cast iron look. Those heads were completely nasty before. Years of rust and gunk and junk and everything else. And there's some combustion chamber work. Joe does a lot of work to that spark plug boss there, which on the P heads kind of adds a little bit of frustration to the port work, and it also adds to the frustration of picking pistons, because you know, if I want to do a dome or something like that, I've got to dodge that big spark plug boss sticking up there. But there's the valve pairs that we used. There's a good shot of the intake ports. Joe does really good work. Some checking springs on there where he's been checking the flow. There he's got it on the flow bench. Got his entry plate set up in front of the intake port. Everything looks really nice. And there he's poured an exhaust port. .4 cc's, I guess is what he's written down there. So as the heads were delivered to Joe, they were 59.5 cc chambers, and with the combustion chamber rework and everything, we're up to 62.2. There he's got an intake manifold bolted up to check the flow with the intake on it. Sometimes when you put the intake manifold on, you see different things that need to be changed. Sometimes it straightens the flow out, sometimes it changes things for the bad, but in this case it was for the good. There's port alignment between the intake and the cylinder head, so it looks really good. Alright, so Joe sent me flow numbers, and I'll put those up here. Alright, so here's the flow numbers. I think Joe's pretty much finished up with those. We went from a 142cc port to a 155cc port. So when looking at cylinder head data, you want to take in everything, not only the flow numbers. The flow numbers count, but they're not everything. You want to look at the flow numbers, the port velocity, the port volume. Intake port volume plays a very big role in how an engine behaves at a specific RPM range. A head that's too big for an engine will make the engine lazy, usually up until higher RPMs where it can gain some momentum on that intake charge. A port that's too small will make no horsepower. So you got to balance the flow with the velocity with the intake port volume. Some guys look at cross-sectional area of the port instead of port volume. So all different ways of getting to the same goal. If you look at the numbers there, we picked up everywhere. We picked up almost 40 CFM. So I'm very pleased with these heads. And like I said, if you search the internet, you'll find guys who say that they got 250 CFM out of GT40P heads. That's all fine and good. You can hog out a port and get a lot of flow, but there again, you don't have the velocity, you don't have the intake port volume that's necessary for a particular engine. Look at those exhaust numbers. So 180 CFM pretty much across the board. In addition to that, with a pipe on the exhaust port, Joe was getting just a hair over 200 CFM. So that's an intake exhaust flow ratio way up in the 80s, which will be really nice for making horsepower. So what do we do next? So I need to get the heads back here whenever Joe is finished playing with them. I'm going to have to model, take a clay model, pour a chamber so that I can get that to people that's going to be making the pistons. I'm going to have Mahle Pistons make the pistons for me, and this will be for the next iteration of the engine. Just throwing around some ballpark numbers, they said that they could possibly fit in maybe a 10cc dome, so we'll see. We'll see if we can get close to 12-to-1 compression with this. You really got to watch out for that spark plug boss. And the bad thing about a dome, well, the good thing about a dome is it bumps the compression ratio up. The bad thing about a dome is that it can impede the flame travel. So in some instances, it's best to have a flat top, or at the very least, grind a flame travel groove into the piston so that the dome doesn't block everything off. So I'll get the heads back here. I'll try to fit the valve springs that we were using before on these. We'll have to use some different retainers and locks, I think. But get those back on the engine, get the engine dynoed with just a head flow change. So that'll be a good variable for us to test. And then after that, we'll tear everything down and start building the big engine, the big little engine. So there you go. So that's what all is involved in doing a lot of head work. And you know, like I said, I could have spent a couple $1,000s in valves, could have spent, you know, a ton of money on this, but that's not really the goal. And I can't have that be the goal. I don't have that much money to spend on a dyno mule. So here's where we are, and get the heads back here, get going on them. Hope you guys are having a good weekend. It's going to be it for this video, and get out in your shop, work on your own junk, and I'll talk to you next week. Should have some updates. Talk to you soon.